Hello, LinkedIners. Is that such a thing? Does anybody say LinkedIners? If not, I will be the first one. I hope you're all having a wonderful day in Montreal. It's just afternoon. I'm working from a friend's office today, so still living the nomad life. But she's got an awesome office. She's an interior designer, so it's very cool to be here. I've got my Starbucks coffee this morning, which adds to my joy and happiness. And I am really, really, really excited about my guest today because he's simply somebody really interesting, really awesome. And he is also, so I'm going to tell you what he does and who he is, but he's also a comedian, which I only recently realized I knew of him as a public speaker, but not a comedian. And today, this morning, see, now I'm looking in a great mood because I'm looking forward to this interview. But since this morning, I've been in a rough mood, really tired, really exhausted. Some of you know I just started my master's degree, obviously still running the business, running the lives of two kids, one of whom is 4 years old. So this morning I woke up tired, exhausted, and in a mood. But the reason that I mentioned that my guest is also a comedian is, who knows, maybe we'll get some jokes also today and we'll get to laugh, and that will help all of our moods. So my guest today is Joze Piranian. And there are a lot of things that are interesting about Joze, but one of them is that he's a renowned public speaker. Okay, he is one. He's a TEDx speaker. He won Inspirational Speaker of the Year award. Inspirational Speaker of the Year award. That is very, very cool. But he actually is somebody, and what I find most fascinating is always people's stories, how they arrived at their current, to be doing what they're doing today. And Joze avoided speaking for big part of his life, most of his life, because he stutters. And so, of course, when you stutter, you don't necessarily think of a career in public speaking. So he limited himself, and yet he has now performed, I mentioned TEDx, but United Nations, HR Leaders Summit, so many different events. How cool is that, right? The ultimate, they say, we know that public speaking is the world's number one fear, right? Over everything else. Everybody I speak to is so afraid of public speaking, so hesitant. We feel, we're not good enough. But I know that, we're all going to get put to shame right now in a good way by someone who has really overcome, an obstacle on his way to become a renowned public speaker. So enough of me speaking. I am so excited to bring on Joze. Hi there.
Hi. What an amazing intro. And it's a good thing you mentioned the stuttering in your intro. Otherwise, I always begin any virtual talks by saying that I stutter. Your internet connection is absolutely fine, guys. Whoever is watching this, there's no need to refresh. Built in buffering.
That's good. So you throw in a joke there too. I like that. Um, I'm curious to rewind and learn a lot about you. But as I mentioned to you when we were getting to know each other a little bit before going live, I always had big complexes about public speaking because I was born in Ukraine, and when I moved to Canada, I had a really rough accent, so people couldn't understand what I was saying most of the time. And when I gave presentations in school, and like school setting, because I did a business degree, so there was a lot of presentations. Oh, that was rough because kids are not nice, and they would snicker and point and whisper, and then I'd forget all that I had to say and get massively nervous. So what was it like? What was it like for you when you were growing up and you were put in situations where you had to speak? And you stuttered, and so that would for sure, attract attention and looks and all those things. What was it like?
It's interesting you bring up the accents because quite often after my talks, I would hear from an uh, audience member who would come up to me and say, "Hey, I could really relate to your journey in a strange way, even though I don't have a speech impediment the way that you do. When I moved to the US or to Canada, I allowed the fact that I sound different to prevent me from expressing myself, and thus I missed out on countless social, professional, romantic opportunities, all the things that make up a happy and fulfilled life, really. So I would say, in my case, that fear of judgment for being who I am had been a recurring theme in my life. And everyone can hold back due to their own equivalent of a stutter. In my case, it was a severe speech impediment. I've worked on it. I currently use a breathing technique to control it, hence why I take a deep breath every few words. The most challenging part of my journey was not wanting to look different and thus deciding to choose silence over expression.
Yeah, exactly, that relate to. And it's interesting to know that some, immigrants do as well, because that's exactly it. People say, it's great to stand out and we should all want to stand out, but sometimes we just want to fit in and not stand out, right? It takes a lot of maturity, but sometimes courage to say, you know what, it's fine. I will stand out, even not in those, those ways that are more challenging. Um, and by the way, so for me, even though I managed to get rid of big part of my accent, it really comes out when I'm tired, nervous, or angry. Those are the times. Is it the same for you with stutter?
It can definitely vary in its intensity depending on whether or not I've worked on it, I've practiced my breathing technique, or if I have gotten adequate rest. I suppose that's a big one. If I have meditated, that's also a big factor. It's I could see how or why there would be uh, parallels between having a stutter or having a foreign accent, because in both cases it requires doing a conscious act to maybe control or to improve. So I could see how, if we're not on on top of our state, it it can be it can be more difficult to do something that does not come naturally to us, and it could be speaking a new language, or it could be trying to speak if you initially have a speech impediment.
Yeah. But so, okay, so I'm trying to understand. So for a long time, you silenced yourself, right? For the reasons you just described. And then today, you do two of the most difficult and like fear inducing things in people. You're public speaking and the comedian. Like both are things that people are petrified of. So I want to know what was, and now, as I said, like you've like spoken United Nations and like TEDx speaker, you've spoken on big stages. What was the first speaking event? And I was like, why? Why did you decide to do it? And what was that experience like?
There's a quote by Robert Frost that says, the best way out is through. And I think that sums up the philosophy that I've had to adapt on my own path. I could not allow fear to mean no. I had to change that relationship between fear and inaction to one between fear and action. In terms of my first speaking event, actually, the first time I shared my story on stage was at an event called Speaker Slam. It's an inspirational speaking competition. I shared my journey for the first time. I ended up winning the competition. I then won the second one, which was a competition with all of the winners of 2017. I am so grateful to have also won that one again. And then I received the invitation to speak at TEDx. And after that, I started receiving requests to do keynotes professionally about things like overcoming adversity or the diversity and inclusion. In terms of the stand-up comedy, that had started a few months before my first public speaking event. And I knew intuitively that using humor can allow us, as Sumia pointed out in the comment section, when we use humor, we are able to gain control over our narrative as opposed to being a victim of the circumstances. And that proved to be an extremely powerful step for me to get into stand-up comedy. And I've since done stand-up in 3 continents and 3 languages.
That is really remarkable and really, really cool. And I know, but also like I've used sometimes, I don't know if it's humor, but like self-deprecating jokes,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then I'm thinking like, but should I be making fun of myself? Right? Like sometimes I will say, like there are words that I just cannot pronounce in English, like no matter what, right? And I'll say, and like right away, before even people react, they go like, yeah, it's like this one I'm never gonna pronounce correctly. Like it's just beyond my capability of, enunciating. But so in your stand-up comedy, do you talk specifically about your, do you talk about stuttering, or what things do you talk about? Is it self-deprecating?
See, I kind of interpret it as being self empowering, even though yes, it is technically self deprecating humor. I find that for me, because I had been so insecure about it my entire life, when I can joke about it, to me that is super empowering. If someone else who did not have a stutter make the same jokes, obviously that would be different, and that I would not interpret it positively. But when I take full ownership of who I am and I manage to joke about it through confidence and completely owning what makes me unique. To me, that has been a key part of my journey. And in terms of the content of my comedy, I would say a big part of it is about having a stutter. I will share stories, and there's there are so many things that have happened because I stutter. And when I apply humor as a way to reframe all of those experiences, it allows me to process the multifaceted emotions that come from being different, while also sharing my insights with the audience in a way that allows us both to laugh about it and to connect over these topics.
Okay, so I have two questions on the basis of what you just said. Okay, so the second will be, you said you share a lot of stories. Okay, I'm writing down so I don't forget. I'm going to ask you for one of your stuttering stories and what you usually share. But my first question is based on what you briefly mentioned before. You said, well, when I make those jokes or when I make those comments, it's fine. But of course, it's not fine when other people make comments, right? And so I'm curious to know about that. So one thing I've noticed, Joze, is that when I open the door to, like, let's say I make a couple of jokes about being an immigrant or like trying to fit in or whatever, I feel that sometimes I open the door for people to start making comments too or jokes, and then that affects my feelings and emotions and hurts them, right? Then I get emotional about it. I'm like, no, it's okay for me to say, but not you. And expanding that question further, making it bigger. I'm sure you're extremely well received. You won a lot of awards, and you're an inspiration. And you're funny, which is just always a great skill to have. I wish I had that. But how do you deal with negativity? Do you get a lot of it? Do you get also either like, because there's direct negativity, and then when the people don't mean poorly, but it's just like, right, like, so for example, sometimes we'll make like some immigrant comments and they mean well, they think they're being funny, and I'm like, that made me feel bad. Or when people are straight up like critical or just not nice. Do you get that, and how does it hurt, and how do you react?
Sure. So I think I will separate this topic into into real life and comedy. Maybe within the realm of comedy, some expectations can be temporarily lifted to allow the comedians to express themselves comedically. So if I am at a comedy show and I have just done my performance, and then and then if there's a next comedian on the show and they address the fact that I stutter in relation to one of their jokes, if we're in the context of comedy, chances are uh, uh, I will laugh as well if it's done in a proper manner. Now, if, however, I'm in the context of a speech, so I remember I once was delivering a keynote at a conference, and I had asked a few people to join me on the stage for an exercise, and one of the uh, attendees somehow completely misinterpreted the exercise, and he started to imitate me and how I sound. Now, obviously, if this happens, it wouldn't be it 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 wouldn't be it would not be right of me to just accept what's happening in the moment and laugh about it. So I did address it on stage. I said, I am sorry. I think you misunderstood my request completely. I was not asking you to impersonate me and my speech impediment. I was just asking you to share a, a personal insight or story involving your own adversity and not mine. And of course, it's key to express it to the world when something does not feel okay. I think in general, with a few exceptions, if 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 you have if you if you have dealt with it, chances are you can joke about it. If you know, if you are extremely close to someone who has dealt with it, it might also work. And if not, it has to be, I think, a super. It has to be a joke that makes sense in the moment. Yeah.
But does it hurt? Do those comments and any negativity, and if you get trolling, I do sometimes, and I've gotten better at dealing with it, but it still hurts. It still stings. What about you?
Sure. So I remember when I I have received a few comments. So okay, I'll separate this answer into two parts. On the one hand, there are all of the past experiences before I became a speaker and a comedian. And a lot of those were definitely negative in how people would react to the fact that I have a stutter. And this can be laughing, this can be making comments about it. I grew up in the Middle East where things like diversity and inclusion, they still need a bit of work to get to that level. So definitely received a lot of reactions to my stutter, and those definitely shaped me and were not the easiest experiences to deal with. In fact, one of the main challenges I gave myself on this journey was I would go to the mall before the pandemic and I would speak to 100 strangers every single week. And I did that for multiple years until I felt like all of the past emotions that had stayed with me until my mid 20s, I was finally able to start processing them and replacing them with more positive experiences around socializing, around people, around speaking. So that's basically the part of my pre-speaking slash comedian self.
Right. And then now the post. So let's say you give a talk. I do public speaking too.
Mhm.
And so give a talk, and not everybody is always a fan. Do you get, negative comments, negative reviews? How do you deal? How do you deal with those? Do you brush things off? Do you kind of, dwell a bit and then let it go? That's mine. That's mine. Or do you just have thick skin and kind of doesn't matter? Take it with a grain of salt.
I think it depends on the context. I was once at a comedy club performing, and it was it was it was a really peculiar show where the audience was allowed to boo the comedians, and if they all booed at the same time, the comedian had to leave the stage.
Oh my
So it was
God.
this art show that I did mainly as a challenge to see how it goes. And they are typically supposed to boo you if they do not enjoy the content. So the material of your comedy. When I was on stage, at some point I start to get stuck on a word, and some guy starts to yell from his seat. He says, "Boo! Stop speaking. The way that you talk is hurting my brain." And in that moment, yes, I did come up with a response right away. I think in the context of the comedy club, I said something like, "This would imply you have a brain."
Oh, that's a good one.
And now, when the whole show was over, I went back home, and it definitely had affected me. I did write a post about it, to share some thoughts and listen. And the next day, I was back on stage to perform at a different show. So I think it sums up what you said about I dwelled on it a bit to process the emotions, but then I quickly moved on.
Yeah, I relate to you. You know what happened to me once? I was giving a talk and I was nervous. It was a group of entrepreneurs. I felt the pressure was there. And then a guy who's sitting right in the front raises his hand. And I'm like in the middle of a sentence, okay? But I go like, okay, like, you have a question? And he goes, how are you not tired from speaking, from talking so much? Are you still going to go on for a while? Because I just can't listen for that long. And I just felt like I was sweating when he said it. I'm proud with how I managed to handle it in the moment too. But it stings when people just will blurt things out without a second thought. It's really really hard. So I asked you already, Jose, why you started speaking, and so you gave the wonderful quote of walking through the door. But why do you continue speaking? What's in it for you? What's your why? What's your payoff? Do you love it so much you can't not speak? What is it about it for you?
Uh, um, um, would would you be able to repeat the question? I was having a quick look at the comments
The
on
comment.
this stream. Yeah.
Sure. So I was wondering, so we spoke about why you started speaking, right? Why you decided to, kind of challenge yourself, and you give the wonderful quote of walking through the door. Why do you keep speaking? What's in it? What's in it for you? What's the payoff? What's your why
Mhm.
of being a public speaker?
I think I have two whys. On the one hand, it's a personal why that is related to my own journey of overcoming adversity by repeatedly doing what I fear the most, which in my case is speaking. And I have found that when I engineer my life in a way that allows me to constantly be exposed to this challenge, it seems to really accelerate my growth and to enable me to live the best version of my life. Now that's the personal why. The why that's more related to the uh, other is all of the feedback I have received from people in the audience who have felt deeply inspired or moved or, or motivated to face their own equivalent of a stutter and start fulfilling their own potential. I can share one of those examples. I had a talk that that went viral on a website or on a page called Goalcast. It's one of my speeches, and I received a lot of messages from people all over the world, including this one message that I go back and read once in a while. It's a message that was from a guy who reached out and said he had dealt with substance addiction and alcoholism for many years, and that really affected his behavior with his family. And he told me something about how I told my story or about my journey of overcoming adversity inspired him to become a better father and a better husband. And I think when I read that message, it was a sobering insight, no pun intended, that really made me understand that this is not just about me and my own journey. That is one aspect of it, but a significant aspect is also what this story will mean to other people, whether or not they deal with a stutter. I have found that people seem to identify with my story in their own way. It can be someone who wants to speak up at work, in person or virtually, and yet they hold back. It could be the person who you wish to say hello to at the party or at the conference, and yet you would love to say hello to them. You're a fan of their work, or you want to ask them out. It depends on the context. There is this metaphorical stutter that often prevents people from acting and doing the thing that they know will get them to their next level.
Very cool. And Bali says it's fantastic that you dwell for a short while and are able to let it go. I really struggle to let things go. I do use self-deprecating humor, but it still holds me back. Yeah, it takes a lot to learn to let things go. I relate to Val. It took me still working on it. Sometimes dwell. But I agree with you, Jose. Sometimes going back to the encouragement and the positive feedback and those things that are so deeply meaningful that people will sometimes say to us, using that to counterbalance, the negativity sometimes, or those difficult aspects. Okay, so for those of us, so you spoke a little bit about your, kind of the tricks you use to help yourself, when you want to, let's say, control your stutter during a talk you're giving. What about any other public speaking tips? Again, we know that it's the number one fear that people have over death is public speaking. What are some of the tips you'd give apart from just do it, take the plunge? Do you have any tips as far as how to best structure a talk to deliver bigger punch, or anything else that you recommend in addition to just doing it, and also just kind of breathe, meditate, put yourself in the zone? What else?
Those are definitely some key ones. Meditation is so key, as well as I do this practice called breath work. It is not related to the breathing technique I use for my stutter. It's one variation of it is called Wim Hof breathing, and there's also one called conscious connected breathing, and both of those have proved really effective for the state of mind before a talk. In terms of more technical skills for public speaking, what has helped me is to think of a speech as a story, in the sense that you want to take the audience from point A to point B. And of course, the introduction can be a hook that is relevant to your audience, and that's the first open-ended question or comment that grabs their attention, so that they realize that even though this speaker is not me, they have something to share that concerns me and my own journey. So that's the hook. And then I find that the main portion of the talk has to be point A to point B. You talk about the steps, the ups and the downs that allowed you to go from the starting point or the problem, and then all the way to the end point or the solution. And then the conclusion can be a way to make it about the audience once again. So the intros about the audience, then the body of the speech can be more so about your personal journey from point A to point B in a way that can relate to the audience. And then the conclusion is, what does this mean for the audience, and what are some of the key takeaways that they can implement in their own lives. So that's from a content standpoint. From more of a context standpoint, it's things like eye eye contact, of course, is key, and of course this applies a bit more to in in person talks, although you can still find a way to in incorporate this virtually. So things like looking at each person for a few seconds before you move on, or things like pausing right after you say one of your key points. You want it to really, you want to give people some time for them to process what you just said. Of course, for me, that is built in with a stutter and the pauses that I take for my breathing technique. And lastly, I will say being comfortable with using vocal variety, to be comfortable with changing the tone, the pace based on the points that you want to make.
Do you rehearse a lot?
I definitely rehearse a lot. Yes, I would say when I did, for example, my TEDx talk, that took that took months and months of rehearsing, writing different sections of the speech based on the feedback I would receive. And I rehearsed it in front of smaller crowds, as well as to myself over and over and over and over again. So I definitely do value rehearsing a lot with my talks. Uh, I know some speakers tend to not rehearse a lot or as much, and that's okay. Everyone has their own way of doing things.
Mhm. Do you record yourself and watch the recordings, or do you watch when it's already recorded, like your TEDx? Did you watch, and then do you like watch, take notes so that you can then rehearse again on the basis of that?
I definitely have rewatched talks and stand-up performances, both as a spectator. Sometimes I'll hear one of my own talks, and if I'm not going through the best week or the best month, sometimes there can be insights that myself from that setting is saying to myself in this state of mind. So I have definitely rewatched talks, and I do, of course, pick up on the things that I can improve for future events.
Um, what's your big what's your big dream? Do you have a dream of big professional dream? Do you have a dream of speaking at a particular event, or what's your I guess, yeah, I guess your dream, but also your vision for your professional future? What's next?
At the moment, I have been doing a lot of talks virtually. This is it seems the way things are going until at least the spring based on the I I I have gotten bookings that are virtual on until March, and then the ones in the summer and the fall of 2021, they are assuming that those will be in person. I hope so too, Marina. I really miss traveling and the whole experience of being with a big crowd. So we shall see how that evolves. So for I intend on speaking and sharing my message on as many stages as I can all around the world. I intend on performing more comedy all over. I was supposed to do my first televised comedy festival this year. That got canceled. I hope it'll happen next year for the CBC. And then the idea of writing a book is also in my future. And lastly, I will say there is a movie being made about my journey at the moment, and I'm excited to see how that evolves. We were supposed to go back to my home country of Lebanon last December, but then that got postponed due to a revolution that was happening there. We did not know that 2020 was going to present a whole other series of obstacles for travel. In hindsight, I'm sure the filmmaker, her producer, and the crew would have opted for last December. That trip might end up happening this December to capture footage of my childhood, my family, my friends, my past, as part of the overall film. I'll share the trailer of the movie with you as well.
Please do, if you can, after drop it in comments, because I saw it as really, really cool.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was really cool. Jose, when I came to this LinkedIn live session, I expected to hear you say that you overcame your stutter and we're now speaking normally in quotation marks like Joe Biden. I was entirely humbled to learn that you have embraced the stutter and excel in your life in spite of it. You're a wonderful example of living with what gifts life have given you. Thank you for sharing your story here. God bless you. What a wonderful and most perfect wrap up of our conversation. And I definitely echo it. You are an inspiration, Jose. I love that. Thank you for sharing the trailer of the movie. And I love that you're such also great example. I told you my big passion and area of interest and also research right now for a book that I want to write eventually is personal branding. So not a book about myself, but a methodology of personal branding. And so I just get inspired by people who are building meaningful, impactful personal brands that make a difference, worldwide. So from your talks to your, viral Goalcast video that's getting, the feedback you mentioned, to the film being made about you, your book, that's just all really, really inspiring examples of, as you said, embracing adversity, but then doing things of impact, meaning, and going from silencing yourself to being really proud and being like, here's everything I've got going on, which is really awesome. So thank you so much for taking your time and being a guest on the Voice of a Leader LinkedIn Live show.
Absolutely, and thank you, Marina, for hosting me. It was a very enjoyable and intellectually stimulating conversation. I also really enjoyed reading the comments, and it seems like you have a very interesting audience.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for your time. And I'll continue following you, your journey, and when that film's finally made, because eventually we are going to be allowed to travel and get out. And I'm really going to be looking forward to seeing that film. Thank you again, Joze.